Blizzard fully deleted a support hero from the roster. Now, there's actually been one hero that has gone through more changes and reworks than any other hero in the entire game, and that's Symmetra, who was actually a support hero on release. But we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the release of Overwatch 1 back in 2016. Now, when the game first launched, there was actually only 4 heroes in the supporting category: Lucio, Mercy, Zen, and Sim. Now, it's kind of interesting to think about the fact that Lucio, Zen, Mercy, Lucio, these support combos are considered some of the worst that we have now, and it's funny that they were the only supports you could play back during launch. Now, in recent times, there's been a huge push to call supports supports and not healers, because supports are supposed to do so much more than purely heal, and it can actually lead new players or players that don't find value in their utility and damage into just overly healing or being a heal bot. But back then, Sim was a support that literally couldn't heal. And that's a very strange thing, because she's the only support that we've ever seen that didn't have the capability to heal anybody. This was Blizzard's non-healing support hero that brought utility in a lot of other ways. First off, there was a teleporter ultimate. This all works a lot different than the ability we have from today, where you popped it in a position and then it would spawn another teleporter right outside your spawn. Now, if this was never actually destroyed, it would just stay, so your team could constantly come back over and over and over again right to the front lines from all the way back in spawn. And on some of these defense-sided maps, especially 2CP, like Hanamura or Temple of Anubis First Defense, you could shortcut the spawn disadvantage on the defensive side because the teleporter would constantly bring you back, and it was rather hard for players to go around, find the teleporter, and destroy it, so it was really busted in low elo. Now, Sim did have something called the Photon Shield, which is something that she could throw on a target and it would give them 25 shield. Think of it like Briggs armor packs, but shields instead, and unless she moved it or unless the person died, the shields would perpetuate. Very interesting that this ability kind of came back in the form of a different character, although you can just see an obvious power creep here where having 1 shield versus 3 instantaneous healths that are on a charge counter, that's a lot more powerful. Now, last up was the primary fire, which was a photon projector, and it was literally something that tracked enemies. It still charged up like it does now, but it was auto-locking. You didn't really have to aim it, and it really bent to where the enemy was in front of you. Think of it kind of like Moira's damage. Now, this character didn't really fit the supporting role. Even though it did bring extra utility, it didn't necessarily align with what you needed at a support. And imagine trying to rock like Zen Sim with 2 tanks and 2 other DPS. Yeah, you have a 1 healer support combo, and Blizzard even reminded you to run 2 supports, but if you had one of them as Sim, it was not really like you had a support. Now we move on to the first major rework of Symmetra, which was December 13th, 2016. Now, this patch notes changed a ton about Symmetra. First off, the photon barrier replaced the photon shield. No longer did you throw shields onto selective targets. Now you threw a shield in front of you that moved forward and protected you from damage. This is kind of like a Sigma shield that just gets pushed forward. That's kind of what it looked like, although a lot more circular and blue. But this was an ability that you could use to reactively stop abilities or use it and then push with it to get into close range. Now, Symmetra also got a new ultimate, but she didn't lose her previous one. She still maintained teleporter on ultimate, so this makes her the only character that has ever received 2 ults and had them. The ability to use them both and decide between them, which is something that I think that they should do a lot more in the future. It's a really cool concept that they kind of used once and then scrapped, but basically you could do the teleporter or you could do the shield gen, which is something that you place that could be destroyable just like a teleporter, but it gave everyone in a 50-meter radius on your team plus 75 shields, and it could stack with other sims and even torbs. Now, remember, for a small period of time, you could pick any amount of heroes that you wanted to and put them in the same composition. There was no limit on multiple heroes on the same team, so you could have multiple sims with multiple shield gens that all stacked on each other. And Torb was different, where it dropped armor packs where you could pick up little chunks of armor and keep it on you until it was destroyed. So you could have characters that had huge amounts of extra shield health with armor on top of it, which was kind of just a little bit crazy. Everyone was a damn tank. Now, as the community started to understand the game better, there became a lot of debates popping up specifically about Sim and the fact that she didn't heal, and was healing an identifying factor with a support. Like, did every single support need to heal, or was healing just something that supports could have, but you could define them in different ways? And there was a lot of people that were either on the fence of moving Sim out of the support role into the DPS role, or reworking Sim to add healing to her character and maintain her in the support role. Now, some extra pressure got put on Blizzard to make this decision when toxicity started to ramp up, because Sim became a character without an identity. A character that was deemed too weak or not a DPS, so they couldn't fill that slot, and didn't provide heals, so you couldn't fill that slot. So there were even players like Stevo, who was a notable Sim player at the time, that was constantly getting reported and even banned because they were getting mass reported just for playing Sim. Now, this all eventually came to a head in one of the most important balance patches that Overwatch has ever seen in June 26, 2018, which officially moved Symmetra away from support to the DPS role. And it's actually even more important than that, because not only did they move Sim away from being a support, but they removed attack and defense DPS heroes, because at the time DPS were split by those categories, but Blizzard decided that those terms didn't make sense anymore with the direction of the game, and they moved all of them and combined them into one DPS role. Now, of course, with the change to the DPS role, Sim got a lot of other changes. First off, the ultimates got removed and Photon Barrier got moved to the ultimate, the only ability that has ever been turned from an ability into an ultimate. Now, Photon Barrier did go through several changes, but it's very similar effectively to what we have today, which is just a giant wall that you throw up and blocks enemy fire. Now, Teleporter also got removed from the ultimate and turned into an ability that is also very similar to like we see today, where you actually have to place it in front of you at a certain range that did change over time, and the Teleporter would actually leave after a certain amount of time. This means that it couldn't be used as something to break the rules of spawn advantage, but could be used for more strategic plays in the middle of combat, very similar to how Teleporter is used now. Now, the primary fire Photon Projector no longer locks on, generates ammo on barriers, and there were a whole bunch of other changes, making it just more suited to be used by a DPS character. Last up, Sentry Turret, which was before something that you had to place physically, like a Tor buildable turret. It became something that you could throw and it would attach to walls, just like how it is now. So now we've seen Sim's entire life cycle, from a support to a DPS, but what about Sim today? And what's next for Sim? Sim is very strong for ranked play and has some of the highest win rates in the lowest ranks of play, and in pro play sees some play here and there dependent on the meta. While a niche pick and not very popular, Sim still fills a role that is very unique and I think important for the game of Overwatch. Now, this still leaves us with a couple of questions for Sim's future. Could Sim ever make it back to the supporting lineup? Either given heals, rework to have heals in the category, or maybe as a support that doesn't have heals. But this leads us to the next question: do supports really need heals? You gotta remember that one of the original reasons for role lock was specifically the inability to bounce around the tanks. But there was never anything wrong with having triple DPS or solo support compositions, and that was very common back in Overwatch 1 and even meta for some time. And especially when there's only one tank these days, I do think that there is actually room for some amount of supports to not have healing, and you could fundamentally break the rules of what we see right now with the 2-2-1 lineup. Now, I'm not really sure what is the best for Overwatch's future, but it is interesting to think about whether or not we'll ever see a support that doesn't have healing. I mean, we already do have a DPS that does have healing, right? But let me know what you think about Sim and the future of Overwatch balance in general in the comments down below. Smash that like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.